She's trying to disrupt things. She's trying to disrupt things. Continue on over there. Let's continue on.
So what you just watched was a Virginia parent, Scott Smith, getting arrested and dragged out of a Loudon County school board meeting after trying to speak. That happened back in June. But what we didn't know at the time is that Smith went to the meeting to confront the school board for allegedly covering up his daughter's sexual assault case. Smith says his daughter, who is only in 9th grade, was allegedly sexually assaulted in the school's bathroom by a, quote, gender fluid student, and that the school board reportedly pushed it off for months. But after hearing that that same student suspected of the attack was back in a Loudon County school before their daughter's case was resolved, the Smith family announced that they will be pursuing civil action. Listen.
So my anger was hot, but once I saw that my daughter was starting to respond to the treatments and therapies, and I started to realize that, you know, my customer base was standing behind us.
Join me now to weigh in, criminal defense attorney and anchor at Law and Crime Network, Bob Bianchi. Bob, thank you so much for joining me. So, Bob, obviously there's a lot to unpack here, so we'll try to stay focused on the different issues. Number one, we mentioned the dad at the school board meeting and him getting pretty upset there. Obviously, he was arrested there and escorted out of that school board meeting. And what he was there was to bring up the fact that he says that his daughter was sexually assaulted at the school. It's been reported by the sheriff's department there. That happened on May 28th of 2021. But what it come to find out, the dad thought that the suspect was on house arrest with an ankle monitor, but it turns out the suspect actually ended up just being transferred to another school. And then come to find out, according to the sheriff's department, then there was another sexual assault that happened on October 6th at the Broad Run High School by the same person. So I can understand why this dad is upset. Legally speaking, do you think he has a case?
Yeah, Stephanie, you are mandated by law to have your children educated in a school. And when you hand your children over to the school, they act instead of your parents and are responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of those children, just like a parent is. There's no less responsibility. And having run schools and prosecutions in terms of what goes on in schools, if there is a sexual assault that occurs, there are very specific protocols as to what they're supposed to do with respect to law enforcement, which apparently this school did from what I'm reading. However, that doesn't obviate the fact that he wound up back in another school to victimize yet another person, allegedly. That's a big problem. So when it comes to sexual assault in schools, we took a zero tolerance policy until law enforcement was able to do its job. The schools typically remove those students, and while they have due process rights, the fact of the matter is, it's a serious allegation, and the fact that it happened a second time is just not right.
Exactly. And even the dad, Scott Smith, during an interview that I watched, he explained that, you know, he's for due process and he wanted that all to play out. He was just stunned to find out that the suspect was just moved to another school, putting other people at risk. And obviously, there was a problem with that, according to the sheriff's department on October 6th. That being said, the family, they're pursuing civil action against the school district under the provisions of Title IX. Can you explain how that works?
Right, saying you failed to do that. And by the way, you don't have to wait for a second incident in order to be able to file something like this. So these things happened right on school property, as I understand it, during school hours. So they were going to be arguing that under Title IX that they did not have the proper security and supervision of these children. And as a direct consequence or proximate cause, as we call it in the law, that led to the injury to his daughter. So, you know, whenever you have a sexual assault that occurs when school is in session, where those children are supposed to be protected, I call that a good lawsuit.
Yeah, and obviously what is being talked about here is these gender-neutral bathroom policies. So the suspect is a, quote, gender-fluid student. Therefore, it's been described as a man wearing a skirt in the girls' bathroom. So the dad was taking issue with these policies. Obviously, that's not the only school district that has this gender-fluid policy. Is that a good point from the dad?
I don't know if it's going to be a good legal point. I think the good legal point here is that they had a responsibility for safety and supervision, and they failed, whether it was in a bathroom, a classroom, or anywhere else for that matter. However, the point that some law enforcement officers bring up is during these gender fluid scenario discussions are the individuals who may be using that as a ruse or a pretext in order to get into places that they otherwise typically would not have access. So, I mean, that's more of a political discussion than it is a legal one. But certainly that's something I'm sure is certainly worthy of him being able to express his feelings about that before the school board for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I can see where he's coming from. He's like, well, if this policy wasn't in place, something like this probably wouldn't have happened to my daughter because there's rules against that. And so when you are allowing, you know, biological males to enter you know, women's restroom or the restrooms at the schools, that could potentially be an issue. And this is what a lot of parents warned about. And so, again, that's why he's been highlighting that. Now, in a separate issue, parents are now suing the Department of Justice over the recent memo urging the FBI to investigate threats against school boards. A lot of parents took issue with this. As you know, you've seen probably a lot of these school board meetings across the country upset parents as domestic terrorists. So do you think they have a case there? You know, I get that we want people to follow the rules. We want people to be civil. We got that. But to have the FBI step in, I mean, there's law enforcement for that, local law enforcement. If people are getting totally out of line, if people are committing crimes, if people are doing things wrong, that's what law enforcement's for. But to have the FBI and the DOJ issue this memo seems a bit extreme.
Well, let me say, Stephanie, in my experience, whenever I had a problem as a local prosecutor, and some of them were on issues that liberals were very much in favor of, like we had immigration people that you should not throw them out of the country, people like that were demonstrating they were violent. And when we brought our federal, state, and local law enforcement assets together, everybody applauded that. So what seems to me that's been happening is kind of everything's been flipped upside down because of politics. We have given so much power away to the executive branch of government. What this memo is essentially saying only is that we want to coordinate efforts amongst the state, local, and national assets because it's becoming a national problem. There's nothing that is unusual with that at all. However, that is a big caveat with, and this is with respect to any executive form of government, especially the FBI and the Attorney General's office, is whether or not that intrudes on your First Amendment rights to be able to have free speech. Now, in that memo, Merrick Garland makes it very clear that that is not what they're doing. They're only working with those local and state authorities in order to assist them in educating people how to protect themselves and creating a database to ensure that they can make sure they stop these things before they happen. So I think the memo has been kind of taken out of context a little bit. But again, I understand the concern because if that means people are going there and forcefully advocating for their position and they're being charged with crimes, that's a violation of the First Amendment. Last point on this, Stephanie. Everyone seems to think the First Amendment says that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want it. You may remember, I think it was Bernie Sanders was at a demonstration where I think it was some Black Lives Matters folks just went up to the podium and grabbed his microphone and basically just started talking, and he just walked away. That is no matter how much they want to say that that's an acceptable form of First Amendment communication, it is not. You do not have a right to disturb and disrupt and break up meetings. So we'll see where we go with this. If that memo starts prosecuting people because of their free speech, you can be assured there'll be lawsuits that will follow.
Yeah. Again, from the parents' perspective and hearing so many of these stories, politically speaking, I could see why parents are outraged. It just seems like an abuse of power. And if parents are getting rowdy, that's what local law enforcement's for. I found this memo to be chilling. I feel like it would try to silence parents because parents don't want to be labeled domestic terrorists or have the FBI on their case.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Of course. Coming up next, we have